Wonderful. Well, welcome all. We are thrilled to have you here for our Leadership and Society Initiative information session. As you can see, we have a five-part agenda. We are going to briefly welcome our speakers, then provide a snapshot of LSI, talk about the learning journey, briefly go over the timeline and details, and most importantly, come to your questions. So let me start by introducing myself. At the top of the screen here, I'm Seth Green. I'm the Dean of the University of Chicago Graham School. We are thrilled to be the operational home of the Leadership and Society Initiative. As you'll hear about, it draws on all of the schools and divisions of the university and has the joy of having the most extraordinary faculty from across our many disciplines. But we are the home to bring all of that together and weave it. And the incredible leader on our team who does that is Diana Petty. And I'll turn it over to her to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Seth, and thank you all for taking the time on this Friday to be with us. We really appreciate seeing all of you around the Zoom table. As Seth mentioned, I'm Diana Petty. I have the extraordinary privilege of being the executive director of the Leadership and Society Initiative. I've been in this role since launch or since conception and build for 4 years, but at the University of Chicago for 8. But I actually spent my first mountain, if you will, since that's a kind of term we use here in LSI, in and around city government in New York. So I worked in the Bloomberg administration doing civic tech initiatives and public-private partnership building. And that's where I really got inspired by working on civic leadership development. So that's a bit of the vantage point I bring and the lane I come from when I think about advanced leaders serving society. And I truly am just I feel so honored to get to be a part of this process and work with the incredible individuals who come through it. So looking forward to sharing more with all of you today.
Thanks, Diana. And alongside Diana, we have two LSI fellows from our last cohort. And so, Liz, can we start with you? Tell us a
Sure.
little bit
Thanks,
about your
Seth.
background and then also share why you decided originally to come to LSI.
Yeah, and good morning to all of you. As you can see, I was with Accenture my entire career, and after I retired a few years ago, I found myself doing sort of what we call a portfolio life. I taught at the University of Washington. I did some board work, and in early 24, I started to think this isn't enough. I have time, talent, and treasure that I need to be doing more with. So I found the University of Chicago's LSI program and spent the year really trying to figure out, sort of what was my sort of purpose in life, and I've locked into national public service and getting involved in that for youth across the United States. So, and did spent my years really looking at the hypothesis of whether or not that was a good thing for me, whether that was good for the country. Came to the conclusion, yes. And then since that time, I've been working my way into some organizations around that, and certainly the program provided a great springboard for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz and Dwayne. Can you share who you are and what brought you to our doors?
Sure. Hello, everybody. So I am a CPA by trade. I spent my 40-year career, about half of it as a auditor in public accounting, and then I was a corporate controller, and then I ended my career with opportunity to be a regulator in Washington in the auditor space. And as I was approaching the end of that, I was thinking, well, I could go down typical paths for someone with my background and look for audit committee board type roles but I wanted to pause and think about, well, what else might there be out there? And there's so many problems facing our society, and are there different ways that I can have impact and give back? So the program, as Liz said, was an amazing opportunity to do just that. And so I look forward to talking about it.
Well, thank you all for your introductions. We're going to come back to Diana, Dwayne, and Liz throughout this conversation. But let me move us on to our second agenda item, which is to give you a snapshot of LSI. If you're in this virtual room, you probably already have a sense that the LSI Fellowship supports distinguished leaders in pursuing meaningful next chapters. And we like to say for themselves, meaning really getting to know your own purpose and your values at this stage of life. And for society, what is that way in which your identity and your goals fit into the most pressing needs of the world around you? The origin of this initiative, which is now into its third year, is that the University of Chicago noticed what all of us have, which is the world is growing older. And individuals have longer lives and therefore have potentially more chapters in them. And in a world where people are still retiring from their long-standing careers at around the same age in the early 60s, but now, especially with certain health and wealth characteristics, likely living to 90 or beyond, it's very possible to have a second adulthood or second chapter after that first career mountain. And so, part one of what led us to this new initiative is longevity and its implications. Part two is that we are living in a world that, as Dwayne beautifully described, has many opportunities. And those opportunities, because of globalization and complexity, and I think even more so with the AI disruptions that are coming, require experienced leadership and require individuals who understand systems and how to work out these issues in an increasingly systemic world. And so when we thought about the University of Chicago, we thought, how could we support individuals at this stage of life in terms of really getting to know their purpose for what might be the second adulthood or next chapter? And the second is, how could we activate this extraordinary leadership force for society? Because in a world where challenges are complex, who better to help lead us forward than individuals who have had experience as executives across decades and are ready for the types of ambiguity and complexity that may be ahead. So that's the why behind LSI. And let me just tell you a little bit about where we aim to head from an individual's perspective. So if you think about the origin of this being that we want to activate this extraordinary leadership force, we see the end of the fellowship experience as helping individuals to find their why, discern their what, and activate their how. And what we mean by that is we want individuals over the course of this academic year-long journey to figure out, what are the values and purpose that I have in this next chapter of life. As we'll talk a lot about in the program, a lot of times one of the benefits of career is clarity. There is a pyramid and you know where you're headed. And even though that can be narrowing at times, it also creates clear direction. Oftentimes, when you finish that first stage of the long-standing career arc, you then don't have a pyramid you're climbing. And you have to ask and are have the freedom to ask questions around, what is the value and purpose I want for this time in my life? And as we'll talk later about, we use a lot of great books and how people have asked those questions and answer them across time and space to begin sparking that imagination. Second, we want people to know what issue they want to have a meaningful impact on. And we mean that very broadly, but we believe everyone is better off when they have a purpose. And in order to have a purpose, you usually need to have that in a social context. And so for some, that could be a very specific and maybe classically defined societal issue. There's climate issues, or AI and disruption to the economy, or how do we navigate the many challenges in a globalized security order. So those are definitely on the table, and you look deeply at those. But there are also people who want to build relationships in their community, want to bring the arts in new ways into their lives and the lives of others, want to be better in their social impact on the people around them. So we really mean the what in a broad sense, and we find people have very different ways of navigating that question. And then most importantly, we want people to leave with a clear set of ideas about the how. We often say that there is no magic formula, and just like we tell our undergrads, there's no way to future cast your exact career trajectory 40 years from now. But you can certainly have hypotheses, you can have the ways in which you want to test those, and you can have decision points. And so that gives you a map. And then just like any car, you drive the terrain, and along the way, make decisions about the best way to navigate that GPS. So that's ultimately what we're aiming toward. We call it a purpose plan. And the idea is that by the finishing point of your fellowship, you have a roadmap for what's ahead. But let me not be the one to tell you all about this. We have three experts in the room, and this time I'm going to take down my screen and I'm going to add some spotlights here so we can see our wonderful guests. Let me start, Dwayne and Liz, with you. So, Dwayne and Liz, you have both been through the fellowship year, and we still consider you fellows because you're now part of the LSI Alliance community, our alumni community. But can you talk a little bit about your purpose plan at the point at which you finished the fellowship last year in the late spring, and maybe describe, what your vision for the future has been, and share a little bit about where you are now. And Liz, can we start with you?
Sure. As I mentioned, I went into the program with a hypothesis around thinking that expansion of public service for young people would be good for our country writ large and a whole host of other things. And when I started the fellowship, I really thought, like, when I graduate, I need to have like a toe in the water. I need to be on some boards. I need to be really actively involved in it. And that's going to be success. Because, of course, as Seth mentioned, there's like you're always measuring yourself when you're in your career. And after the first quarter, I realized, this program is a chance to slow down and to take advantage of everything that the University of Chicago has to offer in terms of learning and really thinking more broadly about society and myself. And I actually had some thoughts around philanthropy that I got completely dispelled while I was in the program, etc. And so I revised my sort of goal to have finished my sort of hypothesis work, get that sort of research done, and then to lay out where I might be able to head once and what would be feasible for me once I got done. And so since that time, since I finished in May, I've been pursuing both local in the state of Washington because I'm from Seattle and the city of Seattle, some initiatives there, as well as some national initiatives. And so now I'm on the board of City Year locally, which is a program in Washington. I've applied to be a commissioner in the state of Washington for their public services, and I'm working with a national group around the expansion of public service. So the good news is I'm in. I have a toe in the water, but again, it's taken a little longer than I thought, but it's still all moving forward, and I feel really, really good about it.
Well, thank you, Liz. And Dwayne, can you share your purpose plan?
Sure, sure. Unlike, a little bit different than Liz, I came into the program not having a real clear view as to where I was headed. I kind of intentionally wanted to come in with my, you know, uh, just a wide open field of possibilities. And I think that I had some broad views about, hey, the the problems with trust, the lack of trust in our institutions is an issue. What does that mean for democracy? I started with some very broad, kind of just general concerns. But as Seth said at the outset, what I really spent the first part of the program doing is really reevaluating, okay, what are my priorities? What are my values now? And I had such a strong identity when you grew up in public accounting and you're an auditor and you're a CPA, you have a very defined career path, as Seth said. You have a really defined identity. And I got so much value out of pausing, as Liz said, having the time to pause and reflect about, okay, with where I'm at in my life now, what's important to me, and then marrying that up with issues that are out there. And I ultimately left the program with not a completely laid out plan, but I was directionally approaching things that are going to help our inequality in our society. And so things like economic development in Chicago is where I was thinking a year ago, May. Since then, I have kind of been spending about a third of my time on my professional endeavors. I'm on a board at EY. I am advisory to some of the professional groups in the CPA domain. But I've also been spending time in civic organizations like Civic Federation of Chicago. And then I started getting involved through a instructor in the program who's very involved in a local theater group here. I got more involved in that, which was a whole different, for me, a very different turn for me. And so I'm kind of living this portfolio life, Seth, I guess is how I'd put it.
Yeah.
And I think I'm still feeling my way through it, but certainly with a much clearer vision of what's important to me and where I want to get back.
Well, wonderful. What I love, Liz and Dwayne, about your stories is that you gained direction and you did not come out with a panacea or a perfect plan. And I think that's very accurate to the experience we see across the fellows. We've done some surveying. People say, I have much greater direction than when I started. And yet no one says, I have an exact answer to what I'm going to do for the next 20 years of life. And I think that it's very much an evolution. And I think people coming out of a longstanding career because they've been in it long enough, right? They got used to after you get through that early stage, feeling like there's always a next step. And I think, many times middlescence, as it's sometimes called, is a moment where, you go back just like you were in college or grad school to a place where there are many possibilities and you need to actually experiment a bit before, you see the road clearly. Diana, on that note, you have now seen 42 purpose plans. You also see many more currently in development amidst the current design and imagine pathways. So can you talk a little bit about if you're seeing, from a categorization standpoint, anything developing in terms of the different types of purpose plans that you're seeing across the cohorts?
Yeah, absolutely. And you hear this from Liz and Dwayne beautifully, but we've come to say that when you've seen one fellow's purpose plan, you've seen one fellow's purpose plan, because they really are very individual and deeply personal. And I think just to echo, the points made, many fellows, I think, spend a lot of time during their year kind of gaining some clarity and some ideas about who they want to be and how they want to feel in this moment in their lives, in addition to the action that they want to take and what they want to do. And Liz and Dwayne, you're such role models in that regard. So, by virtue of when we recruit for the LSI fellowship, we really aim for the cohort to have a real plurality of not only professional backgrounds and areas of expertise, but also plurality of what they think might await them in this next stage of living and leading purposefully. And so it's no surprise because of that very intentional by design variety and diversity that we see this wide continuum of purpose plans. And we roughly kind of bookend them with what we refer to as the outside in and then the inside out approaches. And what we mean by that is we have some fellows that during their time and either they enter into the fellowship with something in mind or they discover it during their learning journey, but there is a specific societal need that is calling to them. They are compelled to contribute to it in some way, and they spend their time in the fellowship really thinking, if I can even move the needle in the most incremental way on this issue, I'm going to feel a sense of purpose, of enrichment, of fulfillment in this chapter of my life. And those issues run the gamut, right? You heard from Liz and Dwayne, national public service and civic engagement, economic inequality. We have fellows working on violence prevention, food insecurity, equitable access to healthcare, you name it. And so those individuals are really driven or called to an impact area that animates them. On the other side of the continuum, we have many fellows who kind of hang out during their year in that knowing oneself pillar of our learning curriculum, which we'll share a little bit more about momentarily. And their realizations are a little bit more around, if I can bring my own wisdom, my amassed expertise out in new ways, and also continue to double down and reinvest in it and grow and expand and widen the aperture of my awareness and my ability to kind of engage with different ideas and perspective, that will position me to be the most impactful leader I could be in this moment. And so we have many fellows kind of on that side of the spectrum who are teaching, who are writing, who are mentoring, and kind of a little bit more focused on, can I create positive change in my own backyard? Can I activate and empower up and coming talent? And that is a path to, again, purpose, but also societal contribution. And then we see everything in between. So it's been really incredible to see that variety. And I think within the cohort learning process, as you heard from Liz and Dwayne, that dynamism, that ability to see fellows stepping forward in all kinds of different ways that, again, are very deeply individual, serves as an accelerant for the learning of each fellow in the process.
Well, thank you, Diana, Dwayne, and Liz. We're going to come back to them throughout, but I'm going to move us now into the learning journey. And I'll just say that as I think about the learning journey and its connection to the purpose plan, David Brooks is a faculty member in LSI. And you may have heard this as well, Diana, Dwayne, and Liz, but something that he's been using lately to describe what's happening is that you're going through this planning and experimentation. But the way he describes this second mountain is that unlike the first mountain, which may be laid out for you by the external environment, the second mountain comes intrinsically, and he describes it a little like falling in love, that you have ideas of what you want, you have different experiments you run, but then you need to feel that emotional connection, and you can't always predict it. And I love that description because I think it so aptly describes what we're trying to do in the learning journey, which is we're trying to facilitate all of this discovery where it makes it more likely that for this next chapter of life, you can think about and maybe even fall in love with what that next chapter could be. So let's talk about the three learning pillars of the LSI journey. The first is knowing oneself. And you've heard already that description from Liz and Dwayne in how meaningful it was. It is something that we really put as a foundation to LSI. So a lot of the autumn really centers around this learning pillar. And we do this in a couple ways. So we are a place of liberal arts learning at the University of Chicago. And so one element is that we really believe in the power of great books to teach us something. Because many people have asked the questions of why am I here and what's my purpose many times before us. And so our aim is to be in a place where you are asking these questions informed by how Aristotle and Plato and Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison and others have answered these same questions. We also want to use your experiences. So we have a number of faculty from Booth who use reflective practices that they have often used with executive leaders, and they're now using them in a different context, not necessarily about what does that say about how you want to lead in an executive context, so that maybe your next chapter, but how does this say you want to lead in your life? And a great metaphor is that used by Harry Davis, who's a Booth professor, that you have many characters across your life. How do you examine them and think about which ones you want to rehearse for this next chapter? So after hopefully deepening your knowledge of yourself, we also want to inspire you to look at the world in new ways. And what's really cool about the Understand the World is that what we try to do is not just introduce issues that are of great urgency in the world, but we try to introduce new lenses on the world. So we're trying to give you a toolkit for how would you think about this like an economist? How would you think about this like a sociologist? How would you think about this like a scientist? And we have faculty from all across different disciplines, and they'll often look at the same issues, crime, let's say, and they will vehemently disagree about how to approach it because the economists might look and they'll use data and they'll say, okay, look, if you prosecute more, there is a very clear relationship to deterrence. So if you want less crime, prosecute and put people in jail. And here are the ways to do it. And a sociologist who won a MacArthur Genius Award here will come in and he'll show his qualitative research and follow families and show that sometimes people can be wrongly convicted and it can lead to a cycle and it can have all sorts of knock-on effects. And they will disagree vehemently, and it's because they're looking through different lenses at what may be the same topic. And what we often find so far in LSI is people don't walk in coming from a business or economist lens and suddenly say, oh, I'm coming out as a sociologist. I see the world anew, and I will now see all issues through this lens. Much more often, they kind of stick in their own minds with their lens, but they become much more fluent in all the others, so that especially if they want to engage with these societal issues, when they walk into a room and the public task force is working on the issue of crime, and someone says, oh, I don't think prosecution is the best way to get there, they don't look and say, well, how does that person not read the data I'm reading with your mindset as an economist? They say, oh, they may be thinking about it from this perspective. And what that allows is a much greater opportunity to collaborate across different influences and sectors. And within the cohort, as we'll talk about, we have people from all different vantage points. And so we hope as people finish the program, they're much more ready to collaborate across many different perspectives. And we believe that having all of those lenses at your hand will make you more able to have impact, even if your lens remains very similar. The final piece is envisioning the future. And this is about really mapping out, okay, how do you actually want to navigate what is the center of that Venn diagram between your values and the needs of the world. And this is a practical part of the curriculum where we have a lot of people from executive search firms, from different types of social impact and business for society leadership. And we look at issues like how do you participate on a corporate or nonprofit board with the greatest level of effectiveness? How do you potentially participate in impact through your investments and portfolio? How might you engage in strategic philanthropy? How might you volunteer in a way that is really effective? How might you think about community-based change versus change through the private sector and through markets? So we try to look at all the different possibilities and give you micro courses across many of the different ways that people often spend this next chapter, as well as the possibility of starting new entities or continuing on, as many do, in a next career, but often in a new direction. So, with that guidance, we want to make sure that we're not just giving you curriculum, but we're also giving you coaching. And so there are three different types of individuals that, alongside the curriculum, are making sure that you can have individualized conversations. The first is an executive coach. They're helping you to prepare yourself. So, for example, corporate board bio or other pieces of how you want to present yourself in this next chapter. A distinguished mentor who is typically about 5 to 10 years into their next chapter after their longstanding career, and they provide a near peer guidance on how to navigate these early years. And interestingly, we have been able so far to largely connect people with a mentor who has relevance to what they, at least coming in, believe they want to do next. So, not to take her words here, but Liz, for example, was paired with the former CEO of AmeriCorps because she shared with us she wanted to do public service, and that was someone who we felt could be a really good vantage point for her goals. And then finally, we have an academic advisor. That's someone who is actually helping you to best look at the societal issues with the data that actually helps to inform how you might address that issue. So those are the next chapter advisors. Those are individual for each of you, and those allow you to have an experience that's customized alongside the curriculum. Most importantly is the cohort. And I'll just say that as much as we love our faculty at the University of Chicago, and as proud as we are for them winning 101 Nobel Prizes at this point over the university's history, what we hear in every survey we've taken for LSI is that the number one value of this program is the cohort. We have, I think, really got into a place where we select a group that works incredibly well together. Composition is something that we think about in the morning, afternoon, and night, and it pays off because we end up with 20 people in the design pathway and now 40 in the imagine pathway who truly value each other, who are generative together, and who most importantly are vulnerable together such that they can really have open conversations at a time of inflection, which is not easy, but which is best possible if you are in a place of that openness and vulnerability to what may be next. And then I'll just say that we believe this is a very significant inflection point. And if you have a partner, we want to make sure that they feel included as much as possible. You can certainly apply to both be part of the fellowship. Importantly, we also have many opportunities for partners to join alongside fellows in the extracurricular activities, including the trip overseas, which Diana is about to take. And I think Dwayne and Liz might be on as well as part of the Alliance to London next week. So with that, let me come back to all of you and I'll take down my screen. And Diana, let me start with you this time. I'm curious because you have been part of this in so many different, individuals' lives now. What do you think are the most important elements of the LSI Fellowship?
Yeah, so I think what we've learned and the feedback we've received, again, fellows are absolutely extraordinary in giving us recommendations and insights that we can apply to improve and strengthen and refine the learning journey. But what we've learned so far is that that three-part container that Seth just walked you through is a really effective sandbox to allow fellows to move within, to explore, to discover, and to reflect. And so within that three-part learning container, there's a few different elements that we try to balance, and I think we're finding a sweet spot of harmony between them. And the first is balancing a collective and shared learning journey with opportunities for customization, right? So, what Seth just stepped you through is something that every LSI fellow is exposed to, this very liberal arts, multidisciplinary process, but they can build from that foundation to gravitate towards areas that are in greatest alignment with their learning objectives and their interests. And so making sure that we have the right calibration of those two things has come to be really important. And I think we've found a good nexus of those. The second is the right balance between the philosophical and the practical, right? And I think you've heard this as Liz and Dwayne have been sharing their own reflections as well, that some of their biggest aha moments came when they were studying ancient texts and, engaging with really big macro level theoretical, interrogations that they wouldn't have necessarily expected. And so we do find that those kinds of opportunities where the framing of the question itself is the paramount exercise rather than needing to know exactly what the answers are, that really does help fellows kind of expand their idea set and think more broadly about themselves and the world around them. But LSI fellows are also nothing if they are not action oriented. They are, and we admire them for how accomplished they have been and being able to do and drive forward really big things. So we also want to make sure that there are practical applications, there's experiential learning, that they're getting to translate and understand how do these big theoretical concepts work in reality and on the real world, and what's the delta between the two. So that area of balance as well. And the final, I'll just note, you heard Seth say, the university sort of proudly and lovingly owns the mantra that it is the place where fun goes to die. And that really is a badge of honor of how rigorous our inquiry is, how intellectually robust this community and environment is. And we take that very seriously in LSI, as do the fellows. But we have learned to balance that dedication to rigor with fun and joy. And I think we've heard abundantly from fellows who have gone through this. It wasn't always that way, I'll say. The inaugural cohort really got a crash course in the death of fun. But we've learned that for them to be able to be creative, to be inspired, to vision larger and wider and more ambitiously, we have to make sure that they have space for human connection, human enjoyment, experiencing, the love of life and joie de vivre together. And so we have really tried to dial that up, because we know not only will that advance their learning while they're in the fellowship, but it will sustain their relationships and their ongoing partnerships and support of each other as they step forward into these powerful chapters. So, but Liz and Dwayne can check me on any of those as they share their own experiences.
Well, I do want to come now to Liz and Dwayne. I'll just say that we are the university where fun comes to die. I'm proud to lead the school recently called by the Wall Street Journal the place where you go if you're a lifelong nerd. So we're really having some branding challenges here at the university, but we're leaning into them nonetheless. So Dwayne and Liz, talking about lifelong nerds, can we talk a little bit about what it was like for both of you to return to the classroom? It had been a few years since you were students in university. Liz, in your case, you had even been teaching at universities, so you had been to them, but not on the side, even though you are called fellows, of being a student again. Can you talk about what it was like to be back in the classroom, and then talk about the other pieces of this and maybe what was most material to you in terms of the co-curricular experiences, the travel studies, the immersion days, the next chapter advisors? What was it like to be back in the classroom? What was meaningful to you? Dwayne, can we start with you?
Sure, sure. I mean, it was certainly a change, and I went to I got an accounting bachelor's degree, so coming into a university like Chicago, where there is a liberal, kind of great books focus, it was an adjustment, but I found it extremely refreshing and something completely different than what I had been doing in my technical domain for 40 years. And you talked about falling in love, and I love that, the way you put that, Seth, or David Brooks is putting it. Because really, what I think you want to do in this last chapter is figure out what's going to give you fulfillment, what's going to give you joy. And I think that for me, having the philosophers and looking at through that lens, uh, really force is the wrong term, but it gave me the opportunity in a different way to reconsider my values, reconsider my priorities. And so that first module of know thyself, was really important for me in terms of recalibrating who do I want to be now and what's going to give me joy going forward. I think the other parts of the program that were so powerful, I think, you mentioned seeing things through different lenses. Sociology was the lens that sticks with me as I think back. We had an amazing professor who brought to life issues that we're facing today through that sociological lens that I had never thought about it in that way. And it just changed how I looked at how you might go about tackling these problems. So I think having those different perspectives definitely important. And then the cohort, you mentioned, Diana, that many people say that's one of the most important elements. It certainly is. When I first got in the room with all these other highly accomplished people, I had imposter syndrome like you wouldn't believe. But I, by sharing our stories and being open and honest with one another, we all came to realize that we were all feeling a little bit that way. And we became kind of trusted partners in helping each other figure out where each of us was going to go. And that was a really good part of the program.
But remarkably, and I don't know if this will happen every year, but the group that just finished gets invited to come on the study abroad experience. And I believe that, 15 of the 20 of your cohort are actually going this year, even though, you're a year out of your experience to be together again and to be part of the community, which I just think is such a remarkable idea that, a year later, you're all jumping at the bit to spend a week together and continuing all those relationships. Liz, can I ask you to comment as well?
Sure. Similar to Dwayne, I had a nerdy math also forward background. I was an engineer, and the first month about killed me because I'd never really done any reading in college other than technical reading. And we're getting all these big texts, and we're looking at Aristotle and all this stuff. And Dwayne and I drove together, and I would get in the car the next morning and say, I couldn't even get through it. Like it's like 8-point font, and I've never read in this stuff, and it's late and I'm older and I don't can't stay up all night reading, etc. But we figured out a way to get through it. It was such a fun challenge to go through after everything I've done in my career and the education I had. So, and I found that, I saved all the readings and sometimes I go back to them and reread them. They're like old friends. Because I never had that opportunity as an undergrad. And it's such a gift to be able to go back to school when you want to go back to school as opposed to studying for a degree to get a job. And as Dwayne said, the professors we had and the topics we had were just so interesting and remarkable. I think the thing that I took away that what I like the best about the whole thing is similar to Dwayne is the cohort. I have 21 new best friends. Dwayne and I had dinner last night. 15 of us are going to London together. And the people, everybody had a very different background from one another. I was surprised. I really thought most of the people would be more like me, kind of corporate types. And we ended up with a rabbi and a doctor and people from all over the world. And I loved listening to their perspective. And everyone had, such a different lived experience with not only where they'd come from and their sort of origin story, but then the work that they had done, whatever it was. And so as we brought up different topics, it was so interesting to hear their perspective on things. And it was vulnerable, but people were good listeners. Our professors did a great job guiding the discussion. And, I miss it. I miss sitting in, the classroom, listening to people. And as current events come up, we have a very active WhatsApp group that we're always chitter chattering on. So, we're lifelong fellows and I expect it to continue that way.
Well, thank you again for these incredibly helpful insights. I'm going to share my screen once more. We're going to spend about 7 minutes going through the rest, and then please start putting your questions into the chat. We are coming to those at the end of this. So if we had given this presentation last year at this time, we would have been through with the description because at that point, we only had one path. But what's happened over the last couple of years is people keep asking us, I can't move to the University of Chicago for a full academic year. I'm still in my job, and I'd love to begin thinking about what's next while I'm here so that instead of feeling like it's a cliff and then I have to find my next chapter of identity, purpose, and community, I'd love to begin planning that a couple years before my transition. And so we decided we needed two paths into the same curriculum of the three pillars that have been described. And the existing pathway is now called the design pathway. That's what Dwayne and Liz went through. That's where you are here with us for a full academic year in residence in Hyde Park, and part of a very immersive experience. The other pathway is called the Imagine pathway, and we mean those titles intentionally. We think with the more flexible and compact approach that Imagine provides, we can really help you while you may still be in your career to begin imagining what's next and to test out some of those values and ideas, but not necessarily to come to a full roadmap, which is our goal for the design. So let's talk a little bit more about these two pathways. Let me start by showing you how these two compare from a time perspective. What you see on the left is the Imagine pathway. We consider it hybrid, although it's overwhelmingly in person. There is a little bit between each of these strategic retreats that you will do online in small groups. We have them on different calendars. So the design, because we wanted to align with the university's academic year, is September to May. The Imagine pathway is actually on a calendar year, acknowledging that fits often better for busy executives who may still be in their careers. In terms of the amount of days that you're actually on campus, the way that we've structured design is that the curriculum is delivered Monday to Wednesday, although there are opportunities for engagement the rest of the week. So the number of days you need to be in person, because there are 3 10-week quarters, is 95 days. For the Imagine pathway, there are 16 days. It's quarterly 4-day retreats, so one each quarter of the calendar year. And then you'll see as well the dosage, so to speak. We have 360 instructional hours spread over a longer time period for the design, and we have 110 instructional hours for the Imagine pathway. So that just gives you a little sense of how logistically these two work. In some ways, we think of design as the full experience and Imagine a little bit in the executive MBA context of how to think about the fellowship experience. What I want to call out on this slide is that if you look down, what is actually most significant is that these two have more in common than are different. They are fellows in both cases, and we have the same curriculum. You are students at the University of Chicago with your IDs and access to all of the experiences here. You have executive coaching, you have a cohort that is incredibly meaningful, and you have a capstone project. You also, in the Imagine pathway, have flexibility and you have lodging included. So when you come for those 4-day retreats, there is a wonderful setting here called the study where you're staying. By comparison, in the design pathway, you are going much more expansively, even beyond that core curriculum. You're having a special seminar with the Aspen Institute. You're going abroad for an 8-day experience. And then you are having a full campus immersion, and you're finding your own housing typically around Chicago, the most common places being Hyde Park and then in the Loop area of the city. In terms of where you leave, we do want to be clear about these being distinct in how far along you may be in your next chapter discernment. And as you'll see, we've tried to use this idea of a map as a way to think about where you are at the end of your journey, thinking that you have a compass by the time you finish the Imagine pathway, where you have a sense of direction. By comparison, where we want you to be at the end of design is with a roadmap with a set of next steps. As Liz and Dwayne beautifully said, that doesn't mean that you have an answer and those are the only steps you're going to take, but you have begun to actually experiment and move into those pieces and then find your way into the boards or new entities or next job that you might participate in. And you'll see in the details here exactly how we approach that. But across all of them, we use the same why, what, how framework. And then finally, I'll just say that where this ends is exactly the same. So all fellows are engaged by the LSI Alliance. We talk about you being a fellow for good. We are still in close and constant contact with our first and second cohorts, and they are invited back for all of the big moments of LSI, the immersion days, the opening and closing ceremony, and the study abroad. And actually, the Alliance now will have opportunities to travel together to Aspen, to Santa Fe, and to a number of other places. And so we're really excited about how this alliance, as we have more and more fellows graduating from the program, but remaining fellows in our community, is really taking on its own existence as an ongoing community and social network. And so, with that, I'll just briefly say that the timeline is that you need to put in your application in the next few weeks if you want to be considered in this current application cycle. In terms of what you need in eligibility, we're looking for individuals who have 2 decades of senior leadership experience, a track record of significant accomplishment, a proven commitment to society, and perhaps most importantly, a willingness to engage in deep, rigorous, and respectful open exchange. We have many more people who are perfect fits on paper. And what happens often in the interview is when we're talking to individuals, we really want to hear your excitement to contribute to the lives of others, to build deep relationships, and to discover together. And because the cohort is such a big value driver of everything we do, we really focus on that composition as a key part of our discernment process. And so, in terms of the process itself, once you've decided that you want to apply, you submit a simple candidacy form. You're just going to include your resume or existing biography. The goal there is just to be as honest with people about whether they meet the eligibility, because the application itself has a number of essays. You include references, which we call. And so we want you to be in a place before you fill out that longer form application where you know that you are actually a potential fit with the program. And then finally, there is an interview because composition is such a big part of what we're trying to curate. The fellowship does have a cost that's consistent with the annual fee of a graduate program at the University of Chicago, and the Imagine pathway is set at a level consistent with executive programs here. Importantly, though, we want to emphasize we do offer significant financial assistance, especially to individuals who might be coming from the public or social sectors. And we really want to make sure this is accessible to everyone. We have a very diverse group of people. Yes, there's a high caliber in terms of experience, but we want everyone from a financier to an artist to be able to participate in this if they've reached a level of accomplishment in their field. And so with that, I will take down my screen because we are at the time of questions. And I will get us started on the first question here, which comes from Marie. Can you talk a little bit more about what happens when the cohort travels to London or Paris? And what a timely question, because you will be headed there this upcoming week. So, Diana, do you just want to start with what's happening next week in London? What's the topic? How are you investigating that? And then Dwayne and Liz, maybe we'll hear about your experiences in Paris last year.
Yeah, and I'll just give a quick backdrop, which is that you've heard us describe this very wide-reaching liberal arts curriculum, but we try to counterbalance that at three moments over the fellowship year where we go narrow and deep on a single issue that is changing the face of society today. And so one of those three instances we do abroad with the strong belief that any societal issue at this point in time has a global dimension to it. So we want to have fellows have an opportunity to go and look at other contexts, learn by comparison and, contrasting what other regions around the world are doing. And we're very fortunate at the University of Chicago to have global campuses throughout different regions of the world. And so we have one in Paris and one in London. Those serve as our home base, for those weeks. But essentially, what we do is, again, we pick a focus area. So this time in London, the focus from an academic perspective is democracy and civil society. So we'll be looking at the UK and other European models for their constitutional systems, what that means for governance, what that means for civic engagement and representation, and using that as an opportunity for fellows to kind of reflect on, the current state of American democracy and what we're seeing, different changes and disruptions and an evolution of our model here as well. So that's the academic focus. And we run, panel. We hear from faculty members at different universities in London and in Paris. In these examples, we hear from practitioners, we hear from policymakers, business leaders who are impacted and responding to these issues. And so that's kind of what the learning part looks like. But in addition to having that content focus, we also want there to be a kind of cultural and community building focus as well. So we also go see theater together. We go on tours of museums that are, again, we try to have those be in alignment in some way with the theme of the week. But really, again, opportunities for fellows to enjoy each other's company, deepen their bonds and relationships. So a quick sketch of next week in London. In addition to the learning we'll be doing at the university's campus in London, we're also taking a day trip to Oxford to engage with their Center for Effective Governance and a very prominent writer and thinker, Timothy Garton Ash, who is one of the leading columnists at The Guardian, who explores political issues and participation in the UK. But then we'll also be going to the Tate Modern. We have a reception in the House of Commons with an MP member of Parliament. We'll be doing a riverboat tour of the Thames. So it really is, again, very immersive, an opportunity to enjoy many aspects of learning, but also that continued relationship building. But Dwayne and Liz, share about your travel
Yeah.
study.
What was Paris like, Dwayne and Liz? I know the topic was healthy aging because they do that better than us. And so we wanted to learn a little bit from them in Paris. But what was Paris like? Just a brief power round on this. Dwayne, do you want to start?
Well, I think Diana captured it really well. It was a combination of learning and experiential and fun, and I think the aging. It was so fascinating because the French have, some different results in terms of life expectancy than we do, and so to kind of compare and contrast was very informative. So I think it met the objective very well.
Yeah, and I would just add almost everybody's partner came, and that also added to the dimension of it. It was really fun to get to know everybody's partner and to eat dinner with them every night, etc. So just a fantastic week.
And I'll just list that I'm still jealous of all of you on that trip because you had a private tour of Versailles, as
It
I
was
understand it, with no one else in
fantastic.
it, which I'm
So
still
good.
blown away by. So the access, and a lot of that comes through the cohort itself, which has so many different points of contact that we end up benefiting a lot from all of those networks as we plan these international trips. So we have another question here from Jeff. I'll take it briefly, just in the interest of time. Are the Imagine and Design pathways mutually exclusive, or does Imagine often lead to design? The honest answer is we don't know yet because we are only in our first Imagine pathway. But we do think that some individuals, and we anticipate this will be the exception, but it will happen. They do imagine while they're in their careers, they finish their careers, and because they love learning and they really enjoy the intellectual opportunity that LSI provides, they decide, you know what, I want to do the deep version of this. There's also something that we didn't talk about because this is an orientation for new individuals, but for people that have gone through either the Imagine or Design, there's something called the Activate Fellowship. That's a special fellowship that we've now had two cohorts of, and that's for people that want to start something new. In the year that you go through LSI, you can design what you want to do, but it's very hard, given what we want to do from a values and discernment perspective, to have you actually fully launch your new endeavor. So for the subset of individuals, and there's been about 5 or 6 in each of the first two cohorts, who say, I want to actually create something new, the Activate pathway actually has some additional coaching and instruction around how you start up something and launch it. And that you do in a very small but meaningful cohort. And we started that because in the first cohort, so many people wanted to start something and felt like they needed another year and association with the university in order to kick that off. Earl Burke asked if the application process is yet to come and the Imagine track is on a calendar year, when would a candidate expect to start if they are accepted? So We are currently in the application cycle for the 2026 to 27 year for design and the 2027 year for Imagine. And we already have about half of the design individuals selected for next year and about a third of the calendar year 2027. So even though I know it's far in advance, the application demand has been such that we would encourage anyone who's thinking about applying for either the 2026-27 academic year or the 2027 calendar year to put in your applications now so that you can be considered. If you are interested in the future, I just want to say that there is an allowance of a 1 year deferral. So you could apply now, even if you're anticipating a 2028 interest. There's another question here. Can you describe the Capstone project in more detail? Should we think of it like a thesis? And Diana, can we have you give a power round answer to that? We've got a couple other questions I want to make sure we get to.
Yeah, I do think that thinking of it as a thesis is actually a pretty good comparison. We provide fellows in either pathway, design or imagine, with a rubric, if you will, or kind of a set of exercises and assignments in service of building their capstone. But they are independently driven and self-directed. And so the kind of relationship between the LSI core curriculum built around those three learning pillars and the capstone, much like a graduate or undergraduate thesis, is that fellows are kind of picking and choosing things that they're inspired by from parts of the core or different methods or different areas of focus. But it's very much up to their choice how they overlay those or how those inform their capstone projects that, again, they are shepherding and spearheading forward at their own pace and how, with what their own kind of outcomes and desired learning objectives in mind, which again can vary widely, but they all receive the kind of backbone support of, here's our recommendations for a developmental process such that you leave with some clarity and confidence around that capstone.
We have a question here from Greta for the Imagine pathway. How should we expect to engage and contribute between quarterly weekends? What is your experience with fellows who might be parents of younger children? We definitely have them in the Imagine pathway in particular. And because it's only these 4-day retreats once a quarter, people do feel comfortable being away for that period of time potentially. And in terms of the amount of time, you're doing some reading in between. It's a few hours a week. And then you are meeting with a group of progress partners. So we pair you with a couple other fellows and you meet up with them and you're doing work toward your compass. And then you do meet with your coach virtually in between each month. But what we heard when we were designing this, because originally we had a much more online vision, was people did not want to be online discussing these things. They really wanted to be in person. And for busy people, they wanted to make sure every hour they were spending was really productive. They felt 3D would be better. So we call it hybrid because there is a little bit in between that you do, but we're trying to do two things: keep it limited and keep it small. So you're never going to be in a room with 40 other people online. You're going to be in a room with one or two others, and you're going to hopefully continue to build meaningful relationships and move ahead while you're in between these quarterly retreats. The timeline for selection in the Imagine pathway, both pathways have the same pool. So you just enter and you can state on there which one you want to be considered. And all the application timeline is on the website. We'll try to get that in the chat. But usually it's about a month after your full application that you will receive word of whether or not you've been selected. And then you have time to decide before the cohort begins. Have you had working K-12 school superintendents or district leadership participants? The answer is yes. We do have a couple of individuals who are coming out of principalships or superintendencies. So that is absolutely something that's possible. Education is a topic that obviously comes up in society, and we're really grateful that we have educators. Again, for anyone full-time, we're talking about the Imagine pathway. We do have some people that have retired from education roles in the design pathway. Does everyone in the cohort take the same curriculum? I'm so sorry we didn't make this clear. We missed this in the presentation. It is a huge, important question. In the design pathway only, because of its expansiveness, in addition to the core curriculum, which you take together, you get to audit 2 classes anywhere in the university. Liz and Dwayne could probably tell you about those if they had more time, but they are either in an area you want to explore in the future or just something that you are really curious about and would love learning about. We've been very fortunate. We've gotten fellows, and I hope this is your experience, Liz and Dwayne, into the classes at the university that are often the hardest to get into because so many people want to be with these extraordinary faculty. We are at time. One thing we want to convey at LSI is that we run on time, so we will stop there. We are certainly happy to talk to anyone individually if you have questions. And in the follow-up email, you'll have an opportunity to sign up to talk with an individual on the LSI team. Thank you so much again for your time. Most of all, Dwayne and Liz, thank you for
Thank you.
your being here. And I hope the three of you enjoy London next week and the MP gathering and the River Thames and my favorite professor from when I was in Oxford, Timothy Garnash. So hope you have a wonderful time. Thank you all again.
Thank
Have a
you.
great afternoon.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Liz and Dwayne. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.